Last week, I went through dyslexia and all the different symptoms and basically came to the conclusion that dyslexia simply means we're clueless. That's really what it boils down to. The minute we know what a problem is, we know what causes it, and we know how to fix it, we generally put a name on it. It's this. So anything that we know about, those things have names. Anything we don't know what causes it, we don't know how to fix it, we don't know what it is, we call those things all dyslexia. And there's this huge list. And if you'll notice, as I went through last week and read the symptoms, it was like each one was a different problem, wasn't it? Problem A didn't have anything to do with B. B didn't have anything to do with C. I just read you a short list of the more common ones. None of them had anything to do with anything compared with all the others. But they're all called dyslexia because we don't know what the problem is. We don't know how to fix it. We don't know what causes it. We don't know these things, so we just call it dyslexia. So when people tell me, my child has dyslexia, I go, whoopee, what does that mean? Your child has a reading problem. Okay, that's what you're saying. And you are clueless, along with all the experts. That's basically what you're telling me, is he has a problem, and we don't know what it is. We do know that more boys than girls have it. The other thing is it's more prevalent in the inner cities than in rural areas. So kids from rural areas don't tend to have dyslexia. It's inner city kids brought up in the city that have dyslexia. Now that points to the fact that it's probably environment. And we already talked about how boys and girls and the left-right brain thing is an environmental thing primarily. So the fact that more boys have it than girls very well is an environmental thing also. So if we can create the problem, we can fix the problem. And if it's an environmental thing, it means we're causing it, which means there's got to be a fix for it. One of the interesting things is this is my personal belief now, I don't think people should get too excited about this thing called dyslexia. We got too many kids running around that aren't doing anything, and they use dyslexia. I'm dyslexic. That's their excuse for sitting on their rear ends and doing nothing all day long. Well, I can't because I'm dyslexic. And all of you have heard that. All of you have heard that. That is absolutely unbelievable. Okay, that's not true. And we're going to tie that back into some stuff we've talked about in previous weeks to show why that is not true. If I had a child like that, would not let them get off the hook on that one. First of all, I wouldn't use the word dyslexic, for starters, because I don't want to put a name to that, because that makes it real easy for a child to use as an excuse once it has a name. I'd say you just have a problem reading. And guess what? We're going to work on that. I have a daughter, Katie. Katie just struggles with math, just struggles. It basically boils down to the fact she just doesn't pay attention. It's not that she doesn't know math, it's just she doesn't pay attention. That's a problem a lot of us have, and I'll be showing you how that works into math a lot. She struggles with math. Basically, the approach we have with math with her is, well, guess what? You got to work harder than the other three getting this, but you'll get it. And it'll take you a little longer. You have to work harder, but you'll get it. I'm not about to look at her and say, well, it's because you have, because now guess what she can do? Well, I can't do math because I have this. And I could probably put a name on what her problem is, but I'm not going to go there, okay? Because that simply gives her an excuse for doing it. Now, an interesting thing about dyslexic is many dyslexics, as they get older and become adults, they learn how to cope. They find ways around whatever their specific problem is. There's always strategies. We have people out there that can't read at all for whatever reason, and their immediate families aren't even aware of it because they find coping strategies to work around it and survive. They can't read a sign that says bus on it. They can't read, but they find strategies around it. So dyslexia isn't even nearly that severe. One of the interesting things I hope you noticed as we went through the problems last week, did you notice that all those problems pertain to readers? If you have a child who can't read at all, you can't even put the word dyslexic on it, because dyslexia has to do with readers who have problems reading, difficulties reading, but they are readers. A non-reader is not a dyslexic. He's got some bigger issues going on if he's not reading at all. Dyslexia, you have to be a reader. Let's talk about what we can do as a solution. And there are two kinds of solutions. And we say, how do we solve that particular problem? Let's say the child is flipping their B's and D's around. What's the solution to that? Or maybe they're reading words backwards. Remember that one? What's the solution to that? You understand that the solution for those two problems is going to be different? So we only got about 100 different things that can be dyslexia, which means 100 different solutions. You understand I'm not going to go through that? Because even the experts don't know. So how can we solve this dyslexic problem and get our child going in spite of this dyslexia? One of the things you want to do, and I'm addressing not specific problems, but general dyslexia, anything that might be labeled dyslexia in general. One of the things you can do, and we've already talked about this going back, we talked about, guess what? Your child was born with certain gifts and talents and all that, right? Well, let's focus on those to start with. What you got is too many people who have a child who's having difficulty reading, and they spend all their time trying to fix this unfixable problem, and his gift or talent is going, no time's being spent on it. You understand God didn't put your child on the earth to read. He put him on the earth to serve him. Now, in my kid's case, that probably is music. Is it absolutely necessary that my children be able to read in order to sing? It's very helpful, but it's not absolutely necessary. If none of my kids could read at all, we could read the words to them. I mean, there's ways to get around that, right? And they can still do their ministry. What would happen if all four of my children were blind? Do you think they could still sing? Well, absolutely. Could they read? Well, only Braille, but certainly couldn't read the way we do. You see, what am I going to do if I have four blind children? Am I going to spend all my time and energy and money trying to figure out how to solve their blindness? Or am I going to focus on their talent and what God wants them to do? If your child has this problem, yes, you want to kind of work at fixing it, but that's not where you should be spending your time. You need to focus on where they're good, on their strengths. First of all, that builds a sense of success and achievement in the child, and you're going to find that now addressing the weak area is going to be much easier to do. It's much easier to address a weak area if you have a child who knows they're good at this and this and this, and I'm really good, and now I'm just kind of working to fix this. But if you're focusing on the weakness, then you got a child there that thinks they're no good at anything, and now you're trying to fix this problem, which for the child is now overwhelming because they just aren't good at anything. So get them good at what they're good at, and then go to work on the weak areas. You know, you see, it's a matter of just priority. Where are you going to put the priorities? Give you a couple good examples. My brother Joe, he was dyslexic. Now, back when he was growing up, we didn't know about all this stuff. But he's got a dyslexic problem. Of those symptoms we have there, he has 2 or 3 of them, all rolled up in one. So he had a real hard time learning to read. And even today, he doesn't really read at the level, say, I would. But at 12 years old, a neighbor who ran a painting company just took my brother with him painting. And my brother just took to it like a duck takes to water. Now, my brother, as a painter, I have actually gone with him once. Back when he was a junior in high school, I tried to help him start a business. And I actually went on some jobs where he was doing estimates. Now, you realize an average painter, if they were to come, let's say this church, the people who own this building, this complex, if they wanted to repaint the whole thing and they were going to hire it done, they'd go call the painter. And you realize those guys would come in and they'd measure and they'd try and figure out the square footage of all the walls. They'd bring in a crew of 3 guys and spend all day here measuring everything and figuring out how much paint they were going to need. Now, this may sound surprising, but my brother Joe would walk down the halls, he'd just glance in the rooms, he'd just look, and after about 10 minutes, after just looking at everything, he'd look at them in the eye and say, you're going to need 27.5 gallons. And he wouldn't miss it by more than a half gallon. Now, how does he do that? I don't know. I certainly couldn't do it. I'd have to measure it out. But I've watched him go into warehouses and office complexes, and just in a matter of 10 minutes, just by looking through the complex, come within a half a gallon of the exact amount of paint he's going to need to paint it. It's a talent he has. You know how most painters, if they're going to, this is like a window and they're going to cut this in, they got that tape. You know, they put the tape on there. You know, while the average painter is sitting there putting tape around one window, my brother would take his paintbrush and go, and it'd be cut in, perfect straight line, no tape. My brother doesn't know the meaning of tape. He doesn't know what it's for. He just takes his brush and goes, just like that, and it's done. So you realize he could paint around 20 windows while the average painter is putting tape on one. Okay? How does he do that? I don't know, I've tried it. I'm not real good at it. He does it. He's a painter. That's his strength. That's what he's good at. And so, how much reading do you think you got to do to be able to paint around a window? None. He doesn't have to know how to read to do that. And when he had his business, guess what? He had somebody else doing his books. You see, you can hire people to do those weaknesses. But he was able to focus on his strength. I have an uncle that's just like him. People ask me, are you related to Billy Graham? I say, yes, I am. And I could say that honestly because his name is Billy Graham, Bill Graham. He's not the evangelist. He spent his life as a car dealer in Bradenton, Florida, Bill Graham Ford. Now, when he took over the business, he started out sweeping the floors in a garage, worked himself up to general manager, and when the owner wanted to sell it, he sold it to my uncle, and my uncle became the owner. Now, my uncle didn't do real well in school, so he went to work with my older uncle selling. And then he got into the car dealership, worked himself up, now he owns it. And so the bookkeeper one day, right after he bought the business, says, Bill, you need to kind of spend a day with me so I can kind of go over the books with you. Now that you're the owner, it might be a good idea if you know how to do this. And again, this is years ago. And this is back in the days when if you were making $4 an hour, you were making good money. So this bookkeeper was one of the highest paid bookkeepers at the time at $4 an hour. And so she sat down with my uncle and went through all the books. And she kept saying, you understand it? Now, you understand my uncle was sitting there listening to Greek because he never got far enough in school to understand how to do any of this stuff. But he's giving her the opportunity to feel important because the one thing my uncle does understand is people. He knows how to stroke people. That's one of the reasons he's a good salesman. So he listened to her. So at the end of the whole thing, she looks at him and says, Bill, did you understand all that? And you know what his response to her was? Susie or whatever it was. Susie, if I understood any of that, I'd be making $4 an hour. So what did he do? He focused on his strengths, hired people to do his weaknesses. So he told her, I don't understand it. I don't want to understand it. That's why you're here. If I understood it, you wouldn't have a job. I'd be doing that. And I'd be working for somebody else. Instead, I'm paying you $4 an hour, and I don't know how to do any of this stuff, and I'm walking away with $40 an hour. Why would I want to know any of this? That's your job. That's the way you got to understand sometimes it is. And some of these dyslexic problems we don't know the solution to. So you got to focus on the strengths. Teach them how to use those strengths in a practical manner. If possible, what do we say? In ministry. God wants to use them in ministry, so start teaching them how to use those things in ministry. One of the things you don't want to do is provide your child with an excuse for failure. There's too many of those kind of kids running around. Don't do that. In other words, don't give the child permission to fail, because what you end up with there is the old self-fulfilling prophecy. They will. You want to work on areas of weakness, using reading as an example. It could be math or anything. You want to work on those areas, but understand, while it's nice to be able to read, it's not absolutely necessary to do what God's called you to do. There are ways around it. So don't make that your primary focus. One of the things I want to talk to just real quick about reading, just to kind of finish up on the reading end of things here, is this thing called readiness. It's a situation I just ran into with a child where he got to fourth grade, he's reading at a first grade level, and it's like, what's the problem? Well, the problem, I am convinced, was that he wasn't ready to learn to read when he was in school and they started to teach him to read. So when they started teaching the letters, he wasn't ready. His brain wasn't ready. When they moved on to start to teach monosyllabic words, cat, dog, he wasn't ready. By the time he gets ready to read, just maybe last year got where his brain was ready to read. What happens when you get a child who just hits third or fourth grade and all of a sudden just now becomes ready to learn to read? What do? Well, it's real simple. You go back, and we went through the process, right? You don't do the ABC song. You start teaching him letter sounds. Then after letter sounds, you start teaching him how to put those together into simple one-syllable words, and you just start and you just go through the process. That's the only way to really solve that problem. Now, I'm going to spend a whole day on math, but I just want to kind of give you a little taste of kind of what we're going to be talking about on the math section. This is kind of a segue into where I'm going now, because I want to talk about learning. And I want to just give you a couple ideas on math that kind of relate to that. One of the things that you want to do when you're teaching your kid math is you want to focus on learning to learn. That's something we focus on a lot in our family, is learning to learn. In other words, we spend too much time trying to teach math, science, reading, social studies. Those aren't the important skills in life. Being able to teach yourself, knowing how to learn. The people who are very successful in life are people who know how to learn. I was very successful in the computer business because I could be thrown into a brand new job using software I'd never seen before, operating systems I'd never seen before, computer system I'd never seen before, and within a matter of days I'd be up to speed. Other people coming in, they got to send them off to some city, put them on an airplane, fly them to a city to do a 1-week course or a 2-week course and how to do that. I never needed that. I just give me a couple days with a manual. Give me those materials and I will bring myself up to speed in 48 to 72 hours on that software and whatever. Because I know how to learn. So I've learned how to learn. That's the number one skill you can teach your kids. Every parent can do that. Every parent can do that. You may not feel like you're qualified to teach math. You may not feel like you're qualified to teach these other subjects, but you can teach your child how to learn to learn. Now let me give you an example of how I teach math to my kids. Sam right now is the one who's just really, of course, Megan has moved on. She's on to college, and I don't work with her anymore. But Sam has just recently kind of became my star student. This is how I teach her. I'm teaching college algebra, but yet you could do what I do for the most part. I say, okay, we're going to work on this section. That's your assignment. Section 4.3. That's the one we're on right now. Do I give her any lecture on it? I don't say a word. All I say is 4.3 is the next section we're going to do. You know what she does? She takes the book, she reads the material in the chapter. She then does some selected problems at the end of the book, and in math books, they always give you the answers to the odd numbers in the back of the book. We photocopy those pages, and that's what she works off of. And then I'll give her like the problems ending in 1. That'll give her 15 or 20 problems to work. So she reads the material, she works the problems. When I get with her, here's the way the typical session goes. We open up the book, we read down through the answers to the problems she worked. She does pretty fair. Okay, next week, next assignment is 4.4. End of class. She reads it, she works the problems, we grade it. Next section, 4.5. I don't spend a lot of time with her, do I? It's very quick. She's down there, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, class is over. And all I do is grade her paper. That's all I do. Next class, ready to go. You see, what's happening here? Does she need a teacher to teach her math? No. Instead of trying to teach her math, we've taught her how to teach herself. She's learned how to learn. She has a skill of knowing how to learn. Now, because of that, it reduces our time on instruction. I can teach her math. I can do that. I actually did that in college. The textbook we're using is the actual textbook I used when I taught algebra in school. But I don't have to do that. We focused on learning to learn. She knows how to teach herself math. All I have to do is just kind of be there to direct that process. So learning to learn is the most important skill you can teach your child. Don't teach them things, teach them how to learn those things on their own. And you can do that. Because you don't even have to know how to do that in order to do that. It's a matter of saying, here it is, you go do it. You can do it, you can do it. Just give them a lot of encouragement. As long as you haven't picked something that's way beyond them, but as long as you're just stretching them a little bit, making them work, they can do that, and you'll teach them how to learn to learn. Everybody who has a problem with math, I start asking them what's going on, and they say, I just don't understand it. I understand it. And I get to talking a little further. You know what they're doing? They're trying to memorize the rules. How do you work this problem? Well, step A is this, step B is this. This is the way you do that problem. Isn't that the way most of us were taught? And let me make a prediction. Most of you have forgotten all those rules. Yes. And those of you that struggle with math, you say, I don't know math and me don't get along. Well, it's not that math and you don't get along, it's just that you just forgot the rules. I used to have kids come into my classes and they say, This was in my algebra class. I just don't understand fractions, decimals, and percentages. I'd say, how do you write 25 cents in decimals the way you normally see it written on price tags? And I'm like, well, 0.25. Okay, that's a decimal. What fraction of a dollar is that? Then this person who doesn't understand fractions, decimals, and percentages would say, well, it's 1/4. I say, yeah, it's 1/4. That's a fraction. And how about the percentage thing? What percentage of a dollar is that? And they say 25%. I'd write, okay, 25%. And I'd say, is that right? And they say, right. And I said, what is it exactly you don't understand? You just told me you don't understand fractions, decimals, and percentages. What is it that you don't understand? I don't understand what it is you don't understand. Looks to me like you understand it pretty good. See, the problem isn't the understanding. It's the fact that if I give you this problem, convert that to a percentage, you don't know the rule. It's not that you don't understand fractions, decimals, and percentages. You forgot the rule. All of us have a tremendous understanding of fractions, decimals, and percentages. We all get it. We use it every day. It's the rule we forgot. I don't memorize rules in math. I learn concepts. I learn 25 cents. I learn the 3 ways to write 25 cents, which is what I know. And then when I need the rule, I take that information and figure out the rule. And that's how I do so well in math. And you want to know something? Anybody who does well in math and enjoys math, they learn concepts, not rules. People who do poorly in math learn rules, not concepts. So I'll be showing you how to work with your kids on concepts, not rules. I tell my kids, I just got on Katie the other day. She was having some problems. She's struggling. What's going on here? I had a little conversation. You know what? She was trying to figure out the rule. I said, Katie, how many times have I told you? Forget the rules, forget the rules, forget the rules. I told you a year ago, you learn rules, you're going to be having trouble in math. Guess what? You're having trouble in math. Guess what? You've been learning rules. And now you forgot the rule. So now you're in trouble. You're failing because you're trying to focus on rules, not focusing on concepts. That's going to be your hardest problem with your kids. It's not going to be teaching them the math. It's going to be trying to teach them to focus on concepts instead of rules. That's going to be the hard part. And then guess what? That doesn't have anything to do with math because that principle works in all subjects. Okay, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that. That's all we're going to do on math. Now I'm going to start. This is my favorite thing because this is all about learning. I just love it. I love it. And so I'm going to give you, during this time, basically what I used to teach my classes. I would start out each term going through this information. But I'm going to change it just a little bit so I can relate it to what we've already talked about in here. One of the things I want to talk about is something called a learning engine. And I want to relate this kind of visually to, that is supposed to be a tractor for a great big 18-wheeler, okay? Let's imagine this trucker comes in, he's towing this great big long trailer, and he pulls it in and he unhitches it, hitches up another trailer, and let's say you're running the company, and he comes in and says, I can't tow this trailer. Now tell me something, is the problem with the tractor or is the problem with the trailer? The trailer, obviously. How do we know that? Well, he just came in towing another one just fine. Here we are 20 minutes later, and he's coming in saying, I can't tow this thing. Well, I know where the problem is. Not the tractor. It's the trailer. So in other words, we have a part of our brain that I call the learning engine. It's the engine. It's the thing that enables your mind to learn all the information. This is the part of the brain that receives the information. It processes the information. It stores the information. It's the information handling part of our brain. It's the tractor. It's the learning engine. So using that as an example, let me make this statement. The ability to learn one subject well indicates the ability to learn other subjects equally well. In other words, this tractor, if he can tow one trailer really well, then he has the capability of towing all trailers equally well. And if he can't, the problem isn't with the tractor, the problem is with the trailer. Well, what could be going on with the trailer? Well, maybe the trailer's got a flat tire. Maybe it's got a broken axle. Maybe the hitch is broke. On and on and on. Well, you fix that problem. Is this guy going to have any problem towing it? No. The problem with most situations today is the child I've just been working with is very good at math, but he's having trouble with reading. Do you know what most people trying to solve that problem, you know what they focus on? Do you realize that if this trailer has a broken axle, you can spend all the time you want with that hood up, fiddling around underneath that hood, and it ain't going to help nothing? And that's the unfortunate thing we do. We get our focus off, and we're trying to focus on the learning engine and not the trailer. We say, well, this child has a learning disability. No. A learning disability are those things that are caused by a broken down tractor. Those are learning disabilities. If this child has one subject they learn very, very, very well, he does not have a learning disability. He's got a broken axle on his trailer. If a child has a learning disability, how do we know that? He has difficulty with every single subject across the board. He just doesn't get it. And how we're going to address this issue is going to be totally different than the way we address this issue. It's got to be. But we don't want to be focusing on this when the problem's back here. And the way you determine that is, what is this kid good in? Oh, I ask parents all the time, my child has a learning disability. Well, are there any subjects he's good at? Oh, yeah, he's a whiz at science. He doesn't have a learning disability. Oh, yeah, he does. They said he did. No, I'm telling you, he doesn't. He can learn just fine. He's got a problem with some subject areas. His subject trailer has a problem. So that's where we need to go. We need to look at what's going on with the subject trailer. Now, here's an interesting thing now. And this percentage varies depending on your source. But we are told that somewhere between 85 to 95% of information that a person puts into their brain over an entire lifetime, from the time they're born until the time they die, 85 to 95% of that information is in their brain by age what, would you say? She knows, age 5. 5 years old, this person has 85 to 95% of all the information they're going to put into their brain is already there. We spend the rest of our lives working on the last 5 to 15%. This is where you got to be asking yourself this question. What's wrong with this picture other than the fact that I'm in it? What's wrong? What goes wrong at age 5? What is it that messes us up at age 5? And what the problem is we change the learning process. Up until age 5, this child has been learning the way God designed them to learn. At age 5, we put them into the school system that says, we have a better way. Well, obviously the better way doesn't work, does it? But we have a better way. We decide we're not going to do it the way God designed us to learn. We're going to have another way. So let's talk about what happens here. There are many theories of learning theory. When you get into learning theory, there are as many theories as there are people to give them. So I'm going to give you mine. And basically, a learning theory is nothing more than an analogy of how learning takes place. In my discussions on learning theory, I came up with an analogy that gives a picture of how learning takes place. If you were to spend that time, you'd maybe come up with a different analogy. But that's all learning theory is just an analogy. We have what's called a schema. Schema. This is a psychological term, which just basically means the sum total of everything you know. Everything you've heard, seen, touched, all your experiences, they go in, they become part of your schema. Your schema is who you are. This is you. Let's look at the way this child works. Your child's born, and in your home, you have this thing that has a body like that. It's got 2 legs up front and back. It's got a head up here. It's got a little tail back here. It's black. And the child hears you. Every time you refer to this animal, you say, kitty, 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 kitty. So what does this child know? Well, if it has a cylindrical body, 4 legs, a head, tail, looks like that, it's a kitty. So one day you're over to a friend's house, and they have a black animal, 4 legs, head, tail, and the child goes, what? Oh, look at the kitty. And they go, no, doggy, that's a doggy. Oh, so what does this force the kid to do? Pull up a picture in here of the cat, compare it with the picture they're getting right now out here of the dog, and they make a linkage between those two, and all that's sitting on this linkage is the differences. Just some things that are different. There's more similar than there is different. You understand? The differences are very slight. The similarities are tremendous. And basically this link becomes like a lasso that reaches out here and pulls this in. So now in their schema, they have this thing called dog in addition to cat. One day you're down at the zoo and there's another animal. And the kid looks at this animal and says, it's closer to this. And they go, oh, look at the kitty. And Mommy goes, yeah, it's a kitty, all right. It's a tagger. Tagger. So what do? They take this picture they're getting here and they link it to this one with just the differences that lassos that thing, pulls that in, makes it part of their schema. And so by age 5, this kid, you could give them a test on all this information. They pass it with flying colors. You realize this represents 85 to 95% of all the learning they're going to do. And they did it without these things. No classes, no studying, no tests. All those things that at age 5, the system says, we need these things in order to educate you. Do you understand? God did a job of educating this child up to this point without using any of that. Not one bit. But we somehow think it's necessary. We have to have classes. You got to study. And we got to have tests. No, you don't. In fact, those things probably get in the way of this process. What is learning? It's called incorporation. They incorporate this stuff into the schema. That's how we learn. We connect new to old. If you have a new piece of information out here and you cannot find a way to link that here, it does not get incorporated. Do you know what happens to information in your brain that does not get incorporated into your schema? About 2 weeks later, that's all there is left of it. It's gone. We have an interesting statistic. It doesn't matter whether it's elementary school, middle school, high school, college, this class, it doesn't make any difference. Students, on the whole, will retain less than 10% of everything they're taught. Do you know why? Because 90% of it never makes it to here. Never makes it in here. And so it goes away. How much of everything you're taught makes it in here? 10% or less, on the whole, if you're an average person. That's because we don't know how to learn. We haven't learned to learn. We've learned to do something else. You have to connect new information into your current schema. It's almost like you have, like this is a glass of water, and you have this drop of water that goes in there. And once it goes in there, what? It just becomes part of the glass of water. The interesting thing about information that goes into your schema, it's called learning. You actually learn this information. On this 10% that goes in here, I can walk up to you 6 months from now and ask you a question about that, and you'll be able to give me the answer. And guess what? If I do that, have I given you time to go home and study for that test? Do I just walk up to you out of the blue and just ask you? Did you have a chance to study for it? But yet you'll get it right. There's a lot of things I could ask you right now that you could give me an answer to, things you haven't even thought about for 6 months. And yet you know if I were to ask you a question about it, you could come up with the answer to it right now, because it's, guess what? It is there. It's there. Things you haven't thought about. How do you know that? Because it's in here. Once information makes it in here, it's there. You never have to study for it ever again. Let's talk about the essence of studying. Believe it or not, the essence of studying is in note-taking. If you're in a classroom situation, note-taking will solve all your problems. If you have been, thus far in this class, if you have been writing down what I've been saying, then you do not know how to take notes. If you've been writing down everything I'm saying, then you don't know it. Now, all of you, when you were in school, experienced this. You sat there and you wrote down volumes and volumes and volumes of notes. You got to the end of the semester, you pulled your notes out, and dadgummit, I don't know how this happens, but somebody got a hold of your notes and went through and totally translated all your notes into Greek. Tony's going, yeah, I got a lot of, you got notebooks full of Greek, right? What happened? If it doesn't make sense, don't write it down. If it doesn't make sense to you when you write it down, it's not going to make sense to you a week later when you go to read it for the test. Hello? I'm going to give you an example of a class when I was taking psychology, working on my degree. Had this class. They're talking about things called the conditioned response, the unconditioned response, unconditioned stimulus, conditioned stimulus. And I'm sitting there for 45 minutes, I'm listening to this stuff, and I am just totally beside myself. I don't understand what they're talking about. And he's talking about this mouse or this rat in this box, and there's food down here. And he's talking about how they divided this box off into equal segments, and they timed him between here and here and here and here, and they discovered that the time it took him to run this segment was less than this, and this one was less than this. Each segment took him less time to run. So they're basically talking about this. They called it a goal box. Other kids in the class who were asking questions, and of course you always got the idiot at the back of the room who says, can you repeat that, because they're taking notes word for word. Those are your F students. I have up here in the corner of my paper a date, today's date for the class. 45 minutes later, that's all on my paper. Why have I not taken any notes? Because I don't understand the thing this guy's talking about. It just isn't making sense to me. At 45 minutes, I'm going, oh, I got it! I just figured out the last 45 minutes. I understand what happened because I flashed back to when I was in 8th grade. I got on a horse. I rode the horse from the cabin out to the road, probably third to half a mile away, let the horse graze a little bit, and then my aunt said, come on back. And so I turned the horse back towards here, and there was a barn over here. And that horse started out slow, and then he started going faster and faster and faster and faster. And by the time he heads for the door of that barn, the image in my head, you know the cartoons where the guy goes through the wall and there's this outline? I had a picture of an outline of a horse with me on his back on the back wall of that barn. It was like I was scared to death. I'm down hanging on for dear life. All of a sudden, I open my eyes, the horse has stopped. Guess what he's doing? He's eating. So guess what this became to me? A barn. Guess what this was? It wasn't a rat. It was a horse. So in my notes, I still have these notes, by the way, for the hour and a half class, all I got in my notes, that's what my notes look like for an hour and a half lecture. I can give you that lecture today because with that, it went in here. I did not write down, he didn't say anything about horses and barns, you understand? That's what I put in my notes because that's what I brought in the door with me that made this make sense. That's what you write in your notes. You don't write down what I say, you write down what you think and what you already know, what you brought in the door with you that relates to what I'm saying. And with that one act, this takes this and puts it into your schema. I never had to study for that. You understand? I did not spend 1 second studying for that. There were 3 questions on the test. I didn't study at all. You know why? I didn't have to. You know why I didn't have to? Because I rode that rat. While he was going down here, I was on his back. I understood exactly what was going on. I only had to get this, and as soon as I could do that, I did it. And so I wrote that in my notes, incorporated this into my schema. I could give that lecture today. I could do it right now without even having studied for it or nothing because I incorporated it because I rode the rat. So the only things that should be going in your notes, if you're going to take good notes, is stuff that you came through the door with, not what I'm saying. I first understood this concept, and I'll finish with this, when a guy by the name of Charles Tremendous Jones, it was a recording, he's in front of a lot of these executives, and he says, does everybody have your notepad ready? Your pen ready? Don't write down anything I say today. And he says, now I know, you're asking me why. Aren't you going to say anything worth writing down? He says, yes. He says, everything I say today is going to be worth writing down for me, but it's not going to be worth writing down for you. And he told them what you want to write down are those great thoughts you think as a result of what I say today, because that's worth writing down for you. And what's he saying? When you make that connection and you write this down, you're making a connection. That's the lasso that's pulling it in and making it part of your schema. And you understand you never have to study for that. You'll be able to take any question on the test relating to that with no study, no preparation, no nothing. Your study's over. In other words, study, true study, is this process. So how did I study in class? Did I spend an hour of study for an hour of classroom? Absolutely I did. But when did I do my hour of study? During the hour of classroom. I took my study time and combined it and did it simultaneous with the class because I'm doing these kinds of things all the way through my classes. Remember I told you I only spent like 10 hours of study outside of class for 3 years? The key word was there, I spent 10 hours outside of class. I did do an hour of study for every hour of class. I just did it simultaneously. And it was true learning where 90% of everything went into my schema instead of 10%. We'll end with that.